This is Protiviti Legal Perspectives with your host, Chad Volkert, Managing Director and Global Leader of Legal Consulting for Protiviti.
I'm pleased to introduce you today to my guest, Mark Smolik, Chief Legal Officer in the Americas, where he leads his company's legal commercial contracts management teams and provides strategic legal counsel across the organization. Mark is also a member of the company's executive team and board of directors, and also serves as global chair of the company's Supply Chain Legal Services Practice Group, with the keen responsibility for helping drive best practices among the organization's legal and commercial contracting teams. In his role, Mark leads with a focus on developing and leading legal strategies seeking to promote and protect the organization's interests. Mark brings all of those skills and more. He is well known throughout the legal community as a visionary for creating high-performing legal teams and streamlining and improving efficiencies tied to the delivery of legal services. Also with us today is Rich Cohen, a managing director of Protiviti who specializes in legal department optimization. Rich has spent over 30 years as general counsel and in executive roles for publicly and privately held companies. Mark, I want to welcome you to the show today. It's great to have you.
Chad, it is my honor, and thanks for such a very nice introduction. I know my mom would be very pleased to hear those words, so thank you.
That's great. Well, I hope today with our colleague Rich Cohen, who I know you've known for many years, with us today, that there's going to be some great back and forth and overarching best practices shared for our listeners and viewers to really take heart of. And I know I'll be taking notes along the way. And maybe we start, Mark. Obviously, you have built an impressive legal career, especially in the consumer product, manufacturing, and supply chain industries. But could you tell us a little bit more about your career journey? And I'd love to hear, in particular, how you created your first company at age 16.
Well, thanks for that, Chad. And I don't really view my legal career as something that I have built. There have been so many people that I had the opportunity to work with, people that have supported me, people that are much, much smarter than me, who have helped me along the way, teaching me lessons, whether it has to do with the substantive practice of law, or maybe just through observation with regard to leadership. But it's for all of those people early on in my time, when I spent just a little under 3 years as a lawyer early on at a law firm coming out of law school, and then for 13 years at the Sherwin-Williams Company, and then of course for almost 14 years here at DHL. But the journey did start, not just when I was 16, long before that. Like a lot of people growing up in the era of the 70s, I had a paper route. And I was at 8 years old, 9 years old. And it taught you a little bit about discipline, getting up early in the morning and making sure the people had their newspaper early on. But at the age of 16, my younger brother, Greg, and I ventured, and we, for one Christmas in a family that grew up where $3 was an awful lot of money, managed to scrape together enough money to buy a used truck. It was a 1970 red truck to start a hauling business. And that business led to another truck, and it led to a painting business, and it led to early entry into me working in construction and ultimately doing that throughout much of high school, college, and then ultimately law school as well. But it taught me an awful lot of lessons, particularly with regard to customers and dealing with all of the nuances of managing a business at a very young age of 16, 17, 18 people. Because if you get the people part right, really can lead to some rather significant success.
I mean, what a great story. And it reminds me, Rich, we spend so much time working with clients in and around improving the people experience. I mean, any thoughts about Mark's story of, how he started his first business and where that's led?
Yeah, so it's a great story, Mark. And my story is not as elegant as yours, actually. My first job was being a garbage man, actually, where we did not have a lot of interaction with customers. And if you did, it was because you were denting their can, and it was not a very pleasant experience. But what that did teach me is how to talk to people and how to respond and not react and understand what people are going through. And as lawyers, what we do is we understand what our client's business is, and we understand what makes them tick. And using the ability to communicate well, to understand people's motivations is really a key to success. And that's what I've done, Chad. That's how I've learned.
That's great. No,
Well, you and I had quite a bit of common, because although your reference to being a garbage person, garbage man, was a little less glamorous than perhaps my description of a red Ford pickup truck. Really what we did was clean up people's garbage, their basement, their sheds, you name it, we picked it up. So you and I, although we were brothers from another era at that point in time, so we grew up kind of with the same work ethic.
There you go.
Well, and you know, my childhood was being given a lawnmower and then hanging a sign that I could cut the neighbors' lawns, right? You know, and we all came about it, you know, in different ways. But I think, to your point, Mark, it's led to how to manage people, expectations, putting people, our clients, first. I often think about my dad, who was a Depression baby, and he had 3 jobs by the time he was age 13 because his father had passed, right? And the life lessons that teaches. And maybe, Mark, as you think about the critical nature of the legal department, your type of role over your career, and the growing importance as business partners with stakeholders, obviously internal, but also those clients external, how have you integrated some of those things that you learned back in the hauling business, right, that you mentioned, to really accelerate the business that you have been in for the overall executive team that you sit on?
You know, when I joined DHL, Chad, back in 2009, I was only the second general counsel, and the person that I succeeded retired, and he'd been with the company for quite some time. But I can remember at my very first board meeting, where there I was, the new general counsel. We had a board meeting every quarter. By now I had 3 months under my belt, got to know some people, but not all that well. And one of the business presidents was presenting the overall financial condition of his operation. And I had a question about something on one of the slides, and it was in a footnote. And it wasn't something as picky as the footnote itself, but I legitimately did not understand something. And it was totally financial. It had nothing to do with my area of responsibility. So I asked the question. And I don't remember the details of the question. But what I do remember is feeling very hot and prickly because there was dead silence for what seemed like an eternity. But a couple of people turned to me who had only kind of met me, looked at me, and I could see the glare on their face of, why in the world is the general counsel asking a CFO related question? And little did I know that in time to come, many people would remember that. And they remembered that first foray out of the gate of me just thinking way outside my area of responsibility. And it was a legitimate question, and others had wondered the same thing. The question got answered, everybody accepted it, but little did I know that I began to make my mark. And make my mark more so from the alignment with members of the business as a business person who happens to have a law degree. Everything that I do day in and day out, everything that the 81 other people on my team do day in and day out, people take for granted. They take for granted that I, as a lawyer, are going to hire the most competent people that I can hire. And I've been blessed that I've been surrounded with folks like that. And throughout my life with folks such as Rich Cohen and external counsel who have helped me make my job easier as well. But I've never, ever forgotten that the most important thing for me, particularly in aligning with members of my board or my management, is to put myself in their shoes. Don't come to them with an answer where they've got to sieve through the law, the theory. They're looking for an answer. They're coming to you because they're not quite sure what to do. And they need for you to guide them. If not in some instances, tell them what to do. And don't forget that. So the most important thing for me is to never lose sight of where they're coming from, what their perception is of me, of the legal department, and ultimately the value in their minds that me and my team deliver, because their perception is their reality. And it is something that I've always lived by, and so far has always been a very, very positive element in not only my performance as a lawyer, but also in my involvement with the business.
Mark, that's really insightful. In my first general counsel job, I was the general counsel of an electric utility company. And for me to truly understand the impact of the opinions and decisions that we were going to make as a legal department, I needed to learn the business. So I went out and read meters. I went and installed a power pole. I went into a coal mine. I sat in the office where customers would come in to make payments. And that truly gave me an appreciation, albeit a sliver, but an appreciation of what they were going through on a daily basis. And it really impacted my ability to affect the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I can remember when I was at Sherwin-Williams and I was a mid-level attorney, and our new CEO, who had grown up within the organization, been in his role for about a year, and coming out of the fitness center one morning, I asked him, his name was Chris, I said, Chris, I'd really like to go to work in a store. He kind of looked at me and I said, look, I'm handling a lot of the advertising work. I'm handling a lot of the issues dealing with the store. I don't know what goes on day to day. Mm-hmm. And he said, then do it. And it paid significant dividends on just the awareness of what folks go through.
Well, and really looking through the legal lens at the business as a whole, Mark. I mean, to me, what your comments clearly indicate is you're operating as a executive advisor to the business with maybe the legal hat on. But, how much of your job, when you think about your role now, Mark, is sort of this advisory business administrative focus versus core legal? Because I think a lot of in-house counsel face that challenge of the seat at the table, how to balance their time. So is there any advice you would give to our listeners in and around that?
For those folks that have the privilege of hiring others to their team, i.e. law departments with more than 2 or 3 people, hire people that are smarter than you. And don't be bashful. Admit it. Folks, I probably a 60-watt bulb and a 100-watt pack. I'm not the smartest lawyer in the world. And I have been blessed to have the role that I have, but I have the role in many regards because of the people that I've surrounded themselves that have helped me create impressions, create perceptions with people who look at me as an individual, look at me as a leader, as ultimately a lawyer, and they reach certain conclusions. But today I hear more compliments about my team than anything else. Wow, you've got a great team. Your team has done this. We've reached out to legal to do this. And it's gratifying when somebody at the board level or the executive level at an operating, or what we refer to as trading review, said, I've conferred with legal on that. And they know there's no further discussion that's needed because they've got the confidence that we built that. So for me, I can't do it on my own in getting that seat at the table. I really do believe that moment in time early on when I asked that financial related question was one that just caused people to think a little bit differently about legal. And then it was a matter of, am I going to continue to think that way? And when I demonstrated that was the way that I thought, business first will find a way to yes with regard to legal, helping you achieve your objectives, I think naturally it allowed me to not only earn the seat, but keep the seat. But without all those folks behind me, helping me and supporting me in that regard, I'd never be able to continue to sit in that seat.
Well, and it's just a great life lesson, right? This is not an individual, quote unquote, sport, right? You have to have great members of the team. Like you, Mark, it's a lot easier to hire people smarter than me, right? But that's a key sort of put your ego aside, understand what type of expertise you need to build an organization, build a legal team, and move forward. Talking about maybe not having a great in-depth knowledge. Speaking of myself, let's talk a little technology. As you think about how sophisticated technology is coming, and I know, Rich, as you and I have talked, and you're doing a lot of optimization work in with clients in and around what technology they have, what should they have, how do you maximize the technology, but maybe share with us, Mark, a little bit about back office operations, how you're sort of viewing the key challenges you face as a leader, as well as a leader of a legal department with technology driving efficiencies, et cetera?
Years ago, at least in my observations when I was at Sherwin-Williams, the general counsel was the lawyer, and they had to figure their way out or through developing a budget, maybe measuring to a budget. But as law became more and more sophisticated and hourly rates went from decades ago to 175 to 500, 600, 700 an hour, you now had a more vigilant focus by others in the organization, finance, HR, even the president or CEO, on the costs that are going through the organization. So for me, there was a realization literally within just a few months of joining DHL that we needed to bifurcate how we ran our business. Now, at the time, I was a law department of 5, and my budget was a fraction of what it is now. Today, we're a department of 82 in multiple countries in this hemisphere. But the realization then, which is paying huge dividends now, is I need somebody to help me run the business of the department. The money that comes in, the money that goes out, where are we spending that money? And why are we spending it? Are we hiring good law firms? Are we hiring law firms that are just performing to an average standard? Mm-hmm. Because what was being expected of me was the A-type work, and I needed to expect that of the same of my law firms. It's public knowledge, and I've often said this, but in order for me to have a dollar to spend, our sales team needs to generate $30 of revenue. Now, it's not too hard for any one of your listeners to take a department of 82, consider it an organization like DHL, and begin to put numbers together with regard to how much it costs to run the legal department. It's not small. Multiply that by 30. And take your average deal size as $1 million. There's a lot of people doing nothing but selling our services to pay for the legal department, and I have to account for every single dollar. And I never lose sight of that. And when I'm talking to my CFO, when I'm talking to the heads of the businesses with regard to what may be a $30,000 claim, some may say it's de minimis. Settle it. I said 30,000, 900,000. You've got to put that in perspective. When you look at it in the grand scheme of things. And I've just never lost sight of it, Chad. Mm-hmm. Rich, I know you and I have talked about this so much over time. You probably have a similar or perhaps a different perspective. What are your thoughts in that regard?
No, Mark, my thoughts are very similar to yours. And the challenge has been that as the sophistication of legal departments matures, that general counsel used to be focused more on the law of business, and now they're focused on the business of law. You know, so often we spend so much time working in the business, we don't have time to work on the business. You're running from fire drill to fire drill to fire drill. And by bringing in people who are experts in legal operations, in legal technology, in the business side of law, you make certain that you're getting the maximum ROI for every dollar that you spend. And you have to be ever vigilant with every dollar you spend today to make sure that you're maximizing the value for your organization. You know, the thing that you and I have talked about a lot over time is how technology always moves faster than the law. And there's always a shiny new object to go ahead and bring into a department. But the real question that I always have is, how are you maximizing the investment that you've already made in the technologies that you've already purchased, that your team is familiar with? And 9 out of 10 times when I look behind the curtain to see how the technologies are being used, I find that those technologies are not being maximized to their fullest potential. And there's efficiencies that can be gained there significantly.
You know, I'm not surprised to hear that. You know, we all go out and you go to a showroom to buy a new car and you say it's got 20 different features on it. You say, I only want 5. Sorry, you're going to get all 20 if you want the vehicle. Well, I'm probably never going to use the other 15. But with regard to maximizing use of technology and somewhat coming back to your initial question to me here, Chad, is when I did create the legal operations team at DHL a number of years ago, I didn't know what it would grow into. But if I was to look back in my time in DHL and think, what are some of the top decisions I've made and put them in a category of the top 5, among them would be creating the legal operations team. We have a very senior member of my team at a VP level who is the head of legal operations as well as our regulatory function. She has a number of people throughout the various countries reporting to her that fall into the area of legal ops. But it allows us to utilize people on the team. Mm-hmm. And if you look at everybody on that team as an integral part, component, even an asset, one of the best ways that you can maximize an asset like a lawyer is to allow them to do what they do best, and that's practice law. Get all of the operation stuff, get all the administrative stuff to the extent that you can off their plate and put it behind you. Because when I look at my team and I look at the cost of a lawyer, whether it's in Brazil or Colombia or in the United States, and I look at, for example, the average cost of a lawyer being $162 all in, fully loaded in the United States, and then I multiply that by 30, I said, look, you don't need to be doing X, Y, and Z administratively. Let the legal ops team do that. Right. So it does maximize that efficiency, but it also allows us to utilize that team to evaluate the technologies that are out there that could help us, but also to fully utilize the technology that we have in place. Right. And I know throughout the course of our discussion, we'll spend some time on technology because I think it's part of the significant future of the legal industry as a whole.
That's right. Well, it absolutely is, and a growing one, and rapidly changing, right? Usually changing before we're ready for it to change. And maybe as part of that discussion, Mark, think about these tremendous challenges that an organization such as yours faced during the COVID pandemic. I can tell you our supply chain advisory business absolutely was busier than they could contain, right, over the last number of years with very complex challenges across all the business units, let alone legal. So could you share some of the things you did during COVID to really, handle rate fluctuations, increasing regulation, just the overall supply chain issues, and how maybe that's carried out beyond now the pandemic that has helped your organization?
It was a defining moment for a number of functions in our company, including, to a certain extent, the legal department. One of the first things that we struggled with, which many, many companies struggled with, is, are we allowed to stay open? And many of us had to try to figure out, okay, what's going on at the state level? And at the state level, you began to get your fingers around what appeared to be a bowl of sand, and then a county would come up with their rules, and the cities would come up with their rules, and then the federal government started to act. And over a relatively short period of time, you began to have some degree of insight with regard to who was a critical business, who was not a critical business, and could you stay open? But I got to tell you, Chad, in our organization where we had just moved into a brand new building, which is more windows than you can possibly count, on the entire wall of 2 sides of the building in the legal department, we had these massive posters with every single state, every single county, every city, and it was updated throughout the day with regard to changes that they had implemented with regard to masks, no masks, are you a critical worker, are you not a critical worker, what can you do, what can you not do. The most important thing for us, though, early on, was a decision made with regard to our team, is I was going to create, and did create, a core COVID team. And these were people that essentially had to brush aside everything else that they were doing and focus only on COVID. Now, the HR team did that, the IT team did it as well. Legal took a very active role in making sure that we could advise the business, literally on day one, can we or can we not stay open? And I remember some of the decisions that I made where I had to stick my neck out and say, I'm pretty sure we can stay open. And I communicated to the business, stay open. And we did. And of course, everything kind of began to fall into place. from there. But the most important thing, like any critical moment that a company faces, whether it's something like a global pandemic, or there's something as significant perhaps as a material force majeure event, is to make sure, number one, remain calm under pressure. Number two, make sure you define roles and responsibilities of people on your team and define what is expected of them. Number three, stay connected to them as much as you need to assure that the team understands the brevity of the situation, the objective that we're trying to meet, and that people truly understand what their role is. And once you do get comfortable, get out of their way, because let them do what they do best. Under the heading of perhaps too many cooks in the kitchens, that's exactly what we did in our COVID situation, not only in our region, but I was asked to chair the global COVID committee from the legal department in our operation, and it worked out for us very, very well. But it also had some unintended consequences, because some of those folks, and one in particular who took on a very active role, and that roles and responsibilities, somebody brand new to the company, fresh out of law school, it defined her career and set her on a path like a rocket, and she's doing exceptionally well. So sometimes those challenges lead to great opportunities. It did not just for our organization, but for some people as well.
That's great. When you think about, how global your business is, I mean, I even think about our own company, Protiviti's in 26 countries now, our parent company, Robert Half, nearly 400 offices around the world, right? And your organization's so global. When you think about the needs of your internal clients and protecting the organization, I've got to believe so much of your time is spent on protecting data, critical systems, the privacy environment and security that we all, sort of live in right now. So how are you shaping the future of your organization regarding cybersecurity policies, and the ones that may pertain purely to technology?
Well, like any very, very large organization, especially one like Deutsche Post DHL in 222 countries and territories around the world and just a little over 600,000 people, there are a number of folks like me. We divide the world up from a legal perspective, and thank goodness that we do, because it would be a lot for one person to do. So I have this region of the world in the Americas, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of our supply chain, our warehouse business, global legal practice group. When it comes to cybersecurity in particular, there is a very tight allegiance between legal and IT. Now, sometimes I'm envious that the IT department has got thousands of people around the world, and global around the world is a little over 420. So we are far, far outnumbered. And like any large organization, many of us complain about how tight the restrictions are about just signing onto the system, or how long it takes to open something up. But I will tell you this, Chad, we had an experience not all that long ago where we received a subpoena from the Department of Justice. And as part of that subpoena, a laptop had to be turned over of an employee. No wrongdoing by the company. They were looking at a third party, and they were looking for relevant information. They had the computer for about 10 days. And then they called, said, "We can't get into it. Would you please put us in touch with your IT folks?" And I thought, well, the Department of Justice, with the support of the FBI, can't get into one of our computers. It just proves that what we're doing, particularly with regard to a cybersecurity threat, is the right thing to do. So kudos to our IT people for being so advanced with regard to their thought processes. But it doesn't mean that we don't have challenges. We do. We've got attacks all the time. And the most important thing is proactivity from the IT folks in making sure they know what they need to do to put a ring around the fence as tight as they can so that there's no intrusions. But we do have those attacks every single day. We've had some on vendors that have caused very, very significant challenges for us, and we're still dealing with some of those. But I surely am pleased that the infrastructure that we have through IT is so sound and knock on wood that it stays that way, then I'm not experiencing some of the challenges that I know my peer GCs are in some of our vendor partners.
And if I could jump in here, Mark, that was really impactful what you said about how your IT department is staying ahead of the curve. My dad used to have an expression that locks are made for honest people, and that no matter how many locks you put on a door, a crook might find a way to get in. And it's incumbent upon us to never get comfortable with what we're doing, that it's enough. It never is enough, because the bad guys will always find a way to do bad things. So having that partnership with your entire organization is very important.
So, Mark, I know we've talked a little bit during the show about technology investments and how those decisions are for sure never easy. And as you've talked about creating efficiencies, optimizing your department and the company, once you've made a technology decision, what role will you, the CIO, other members of the organization play together to ensure that that technology is being utilized appropriately across the enterprise, in particular in and around legal demands or privacy, security, et cetera?
Well, Chad, there's usually a very intensive review before we even make a decision to license or purchase technology, which would involve what is it that we're seeking to accomplish? How are we going to best leverage whatever platform or utility that we are licensing, purchasing to use, interpret data to help us do things better, faster, cheaper. But once we ultimately make that decision, I will typically leave it up to my head of legal operations, working with her team to first implement. And for me, there's always a learning curve. And it's not something that's done in a day or a week. And if anybody out there is thinking I'm going to get immediate ROI, or if somebody is trying to convince you that you will in implementing a new technology, well, you perhaps should give some second thought to that, because it takes a while. And like anything else, people have to get used to new technology. I mean, think about any one of us when we get a new computer, when we get a new piece of software. Well, the first time you were trying to learn how to effectively use Excel or the new version of Word, there's frustration. And sometimes people throw up their hands and they say, it's too complicated, I don't want to do with it. And they kind of go back to the old way of doing things. But you've got to make sure that you break down the components of the technology that you're utilizing in the most efficient and effective, simple way possible. If, to use the analogy that I used just earlier in this conversation, Chad, about the new vehicle that you buy has 20 features and you only want 5. Well, there may be one that is the core, that is the most simplest thing to understand. Tackle that first. View it as a journey. Get that one under your belt. Become as much of an expertise in digesting that. Then move to the next and the next. We've got some technology in our organization that we've now had going on to 4 years. We have embedded it within the organization, but we're still not fully utilizing it. Oftentimes because you've got to have robust sets of data in the platform in order to help utilize the technology to help you tell stories that will make meaningful impact in your evaluation of risk within your organization. So view that selection, view that implementation as a journey. Make sure that you're realistic with regard to the time frames that you're going to give your people in evaluating the utility of that. But most importantly, make sure everybody is aligned and fully understands the scope of how that technology can be used. It never ceases to amaze me when I walk through Legal Week and I talk to various vendors about the claims that they're making with regard to their product. And then I regale that based on some of the discussions that I have with actual users, and I'm thinking, boy, these two just don't go hand in hand. I often wish there was an army of Rich Cohens out there, sorry to put you on the spot and embarrass you a little bit, Rich, that could go out to law departments and say, I understand what you're using, this is how we're seeing XYZ being effectively used, and just guiding people to those decisions so that we're not making decisions as purchasers somewhat blindly. There needs to be more of you, Rich, out there helping guide people to those decisions. I know for me, if I dial the clock back early in my legal ops days where I was beginning to toy with technology, my wish was that I could just connect on the phone with other GCs who had been there, done that, utilizing technology, and just say, tell me what to stay away from and tell me what works. That will accomplish objective 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Those people are out there. They're guys like you, but there needs to be more of you.
Well, what I would say, in a follow-up, Mark, is it does amaze me, to your point, that companies do not prepare for technology, right? New technology. We're working with a client right now. I know, Rich, you're sort of front and center with that client, who acquired a CLM 9 months ago, and it literally is, has mothballs around it, Mark, right? I mean, it has not been implemented. They don't have a data map on how to implement it right now. It sounded great. Somebody went and bought it, and they bought it for a lot of money, and it is a great tool, but they were not prepared to implement that, and so therefore it's sitting there like a Ferrari in a garage going nowhere fast, right?
Right.
And you have to have a plan to be successful, don't you, Rich?
You do, right? You don't fail to plan, you fail to plan, right? And the problem that you see with these organizations is they don't get stakeholders involved. They don't get all the stakeholders involved to be part of the solution, so they don't become part of the problem. And what ultimately happens is that they view change as an indictment upon past practice. And what you need to do is get them involved as stakeholders for them to understand the benefits of making the change to this new technology, what it brings to the organization, what it brings to them as an institution, and how it helps their careers.
We talked early on, Chad, about technology, and Rich very well pointed out that technology is moving at a pace that far exceeds the pace of really the users of the technology in the legal industry, and that is surely the case. And it leads to confusion. It leads to, well, should I be waiting for the next version? It's like 10 years ago when you say, you know what, I'll wait for the next iPhone because I know it's going to come out in a couple months with some more features that I may or may not need. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to remember, first and foremost, we have to service the business with as astute legal knowledge as we can service. And technology is a tool. But the businesses that I've been exposed to, really don't care what technology you use. At the end of the day, they want to be able to trust that the advice you're giving to them is effective, efficient, and it's going to guide them through the risk-making decision they need to make. That is never going to waver from law departments.
That's right.
Where the technology helps is on the backside with regard to the money coming in and going out of the department, and particularly with regard to the money going out and the monies that we need to fund the department. Technology will help us perhaps be a little bit better stewards of managing risk, leveraging data to tell a story, to be able to go to the business and say, look, we have commodity type claims, equal employment opportunity, just commission claims, whatever they may be, and here's how much they're costing you. And here's the story that the data tells us with regard to each of your operations over the prior year, months, whatever period it may be. And it allows businesses to see actual data where they can look and see, wow, if we partner with legal, if we partner with HR in a different proactive way, we can avoid some of these costs. And instead of me spending $100,000 next year on employment-related claims, I can mitigate that in half, whatever it may be. But you take that business plus all the other businesses saving money, and before you know it, you've saved significant amounts of money just by using data leveraged through technology to help you tell a story.
Spot on, Mark. Spot on. Well, I hate to say this, but we're almost out of time. I think we could probably keep this conversation going for another hour. But as you all know, listening to our podcast series, I always like to ask each guest one final question. And I'm going to start with you, Rich. And you can only name one thing. But if there was one thing as you provide alternative legal services and delivery models to clients that you could do to make a difference, what would that be?
I think at the end of the day, people need to realize that no matter what the technology that you employ, it's not going to fix a broken process. So you need to look at that process first to see if you're following some crooked path that you've been following for years, and take a real hard look to see if there's a better way of doing it, and then apply the technology to the process.
That's great, Rich. Thank you. And Mark, as you think about your executive and leadership role at your organization, the global nature of that, if there is one thing that could make a difference in your daily delivery of both legal services, but also the business solutions you're providing to your company, what do you think that would be?
More guys like Rich I can call and say, hey, what do you think? And no, I'm serious about that. It's not just the riches of the world, folks. For any of you, you need your rich. You need somebody that you can call and say, look, under the heading of it can be a little bit lonely at the top, sometimes really lonely at the top. You don't know what you're thinking is right, left, up, down, inside out, or anywhere in between. And you need some trusted advisor to bounce those ideas off. So for me, being able to, whether it was Rich or Joe or Judy, whomever it would be, to be able to send a text and say, hey, you got some time tonight because I need to bounce an idea off of you. And then you get that good practical guidance. But don't go it alone, folks. Utilize the resources that you have. Oftentimes it might not necessarily be people on your team, but you do need that trusted advisor. And for me, it has been my grounding mechanism and making sure the decisions that I make are not just me being out there thinking about some wild new idea, but bouncing off somebody that I do trust deeply, so that ultimately I've got the benefit of their thoughts. And you know what? It makes the decision a little bit easier. It makes it a little less scary when you make that decision, especially when they're significant decisions. So use your network. Use it to your full advantage, not just for helping you do your job more effectively, but in leveraging it, particularly when it comes to the people component, because the people that you have built relationships over the many years throughout your career, you built those relationships for a reason. And it's because of the trust and the integrity that goes behind those relationships. And those are the folks that have always been my true sounding board when it comes time to asking, what do you think about this opportunity, or what do you think about this person or this vendor in doing business? And it's that trusted environment that's really paid off dividends for me.
I love that advice, Mark, right? It's the phone a friend, right? And if you're phoning the friend, that friend or other friends will phone you, and you build that community of trust, of best practices, of transparency, and you find out what others are doing that can help you in your role and your organization excel and achieve what you've really set out to do. So I think that's fantastic advice. I know on behalf of Rich and myself, Mark, we can't thank you enough for your time. We know how busy you are, but being able to spend some time with you, hearing best practices and how you started that first business when you were 16 and the best practices you learned there that have carried forward is just a testament to your career and how you approach the partnership with others, your own vision, and being very accepting of other opinions and really being able to drive results at the highest levels for so long. So thanks again for your time, and we can't wait till the next opportunity to talk to you.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege, guys. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rich.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening today. To learn more about Protiviti, visit us at protiviti.com.